Right, in this video we're going to have a quick look at organizing our textures and also creating seamless patterns, which is an extremely handy tool. So I've imported a whole lot of textures in here. I actually have a file off to the side where I have put folders of my different textures in there as well. Metal, rust, skin, wood, etc. And you can build up some pretty good files for this. And we can always bring, delete, add, etc. as we go. But let's get back to the Photoshop option here. Now, as you can see already, our layers are getting pretty busy. I've added all these textures. They are smart objects, so we can actually scale them up without losing the original size that they were bought in as far as quality goes. But let's get all these and put them into some folders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift select all the textures that I brought in, and I'm going to create a new folder here. And there's a little create new group right here, and I'm going to double click on that and call it textures. Now you can create folders within folders. If we click on there, we can see that they are there, but it's just a great way of sort of hiding these. And once again, we can right click on those and apply a color to them. So maybe most of our textures are kind of red, so that's maybe orange. So let's make that there. And there are our textures there. So this is a great little way of organizing. Now, getting hold of these can be a little bit tricky. We want to grab this eye, for example. Means I'm going to have to go through here and find the eye. This one's actually labeled puffy eyes, which is handy, but you may need to double click and rename if need be. But there is another option as well. Over in our selection tool, move tool, you have an option for auto select. We can have that ticked on. And what you need to do is make sure it selects the layer and not group. On group, it's just going to select the group folder. And if we click on this, we should be able to go through and individually select, and it's going to drop down the group on each layer, and it'll cycle through, and you go, great, there's the metal one. Now, you'll notice it's not selecting on these, it's going straight to the background. And that's because these are locked, so I could be able to select a lock layer, but it's still pretty handy anyway, just for quickly grabbing. Now, as a rule, I typically do not have auto select tipped on. As we get more advanced, we have semi-transparent layers and filters, and it's just going to keep grabbing the wrong thing. So typically I'll have that unticked, but as a shortcut, you can still grab hold of this by hitting the Command or Control key and clicking on the object, and you can see as I hit Control, it will allow me to click and cycle through. So it brings up that auto select thing. So you can toggle that on and off, and it's a great little shortcut. And it stops you from accidentally grabbing the wrong thing as well. So keep that in mind. So we've got a few textures here. I'm going to show you a really cool technique, which is creating a seamless texture. And this is a really important tool to use, especially when developing assets and for games and animation. So I'm going to jump into here, and let's find a nice texture that we can actually duplicate. I've pre-marked this one, and we're going to give this one a go. Now I'm going to open this in its own Photoshop document. So I'm going to open that up there, and there it is there. And as usual, I'm just going to have a look at its sizing. So we image size here, and 72 pixels per inch, 33, 25, etc., etc. And I want to create a seamless pattern, and you may say, well, what's a seamless pattern? A seamless pattern means that I should be able to grab something and repeat it constantly. So it's going to be the same thing over and over and over and over again. It can be a little bit tricky, but we're going to give this a go. And I'm not going to focus in on some of these harsh details. Creating a seamless pattern that might look a little bit weird. I'm looking for something a little bit more subtle. So maybe there's little speckles down here. So you've got to be fairly discerning. It's going to be a good solid pattern for this. Now to do this, we also want to bear in mind that we don't want anything to have too much color variation or variation in brightness to darkness from one end to the other. So looking at a curved surface, this area might be darker and it gets lighter as you go across. You want fairly even throughout as far as the offset goes. Now, there's ways of doing this. I'm going to duplicate this layer as usual. I don't usually work on a lock layer. And we're going to go to our filter options here, and sorry, wrong one. The little semicircle here, and for some reason it's dropping it down there. And I'm going to do a threshold option. And there he is there. Now what the threshold is going to do is we can have a look at this. We can basically run this through, and this is going to just give us a quick view on where there is a lot of variance. You can look over here. This is very dark. It's a bit more darkness through here. Got a lot of speckles happening here. I'm going to play around with this here. This is going to be too complex. It's too much variance. So I'm going to get rid of that threshold thing there. There's a layer mask. Let's just leave that and get back here. So I'm going to crop this down to where I think may actually be a good area. So I'm going to go C for crop, and I'm going to grab that, and let's see if we can find something that's going to be a good area to work with. And I'm just going to quickly change my ratio. I'm going to undo that, and I'm just going to draw a square, and I'm just going to hold down Shift instead. So that's going to make sure I've got a square, because we do need an actual square if we're going to create a seamless pattern. And I don't want anything too harsh. I'm just doing a quick scout around. This may or may not be the best texture to use, but we'll give it a go. All right, let's try that. Cut that out. There he is there. Now, it's a little bit pixelated that size, but that's fine. It's only going to be part of a small segment. What I'm going to do now is, this is by no means a seamless pattern. If we give you an idea, if I change my canvas size up to, let's say 300 by 300%, just as an example, and I grab that pattern and move a copy across, and move that across, and you can see it doesn't really look good as squares, and we're going to get these weird cut-offs and stuff like that. So we don't want that at all. We want to be able to repeat this as often as we can. So let's have a look at doing that. Now, there's a special way of doing this. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to make sure that we have a copy that we can go back to, because we will need that. And I'm going to go to a filter. So I'm going to go to a filter. Actually, before we do that, we need to check the size. So I'm going to go image size. Change this to pixels. And it's currently 192. I'm actually going to ramp this up to 200. Just want a nice even number for this, because we're going to have to do a little bit of maths. And I'm going to go, okay, it's going to make it a little bit bigger. And now what we're going to do is we're going to need to go to Filter, Other, and Offset. That's the bottom of the bottom as far as filters go. And I'm going to hit Offset. And it's going to ask me horizontal and vertical offset. Now what this does is it sort of mixes up the object. So if I cycle through this, you can see it sort of shuffles it across, shuffles it up and down. Now we need to make sure that this is halfway in both the horizontal and vertical, the actual width and height. And we know the width and the height is 200 pixels by 200 pixels. So I'm going to just manually type in horizontal 100 and vertical 100. when we get this, we can actually start getting an idea of how the pattern will look if we were to repeat it as is. Now, what we need to do is we need to fix these end parts up. Now, there's a few ways we can go around doing this, and I'm going to show you one way. With our background, which is our original, I'm going to grab that, I'm going to duplicate it, I'm going to drag it above, and I'm going to apply a mask to this. So I'm going to hit the mask key, which is the rectangle with a circle on it, and at the moment, there's nothing in that mask. And you can select your layer or your mask, make sure you got your mask selected. White means it's completely transparent. Black means that it's completely masked off. So I'm going to completely mask that off. I'm going to make sure black is selected. I'm going to make sure my bucket is selected. And I'm going to make sure my mask is selected. Not my layer, but my mask. I'm going to block that off. And it's essentially going to make that entire layer invisible. It's still there, but the mask is hiding it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a brush. I'm going to go beef brush and select a nice soft brush. Using the Wacom, great, you can use a lower opacity, click the brush pressure, but otherwise drop your opacity down and make sure you select it on your mask layer. And then gradually, what you're going to do is you're going to, with white selected mask, you're going to gradually brush in on those areas. See if you can't brush in. And we want to get rid of those lines. So we're doing a combination of the foreground pattern and the background pattern. It does take a little bit of discernment to decide where to stop. So we're trying to get that bit of rust in there. That'll work nicely. And that kind of works. There's got a repeat happening there. Might reverse that. I'm just going to hit swap black over to white. I'm going to hit X otherwise. And that's going to reapply my mask. Again, I'm painting it black, so that's going to be getting rid of that. What I don't want to have is that pattern showing up too often. But we don't want anything too obvious, repeated too many times. Yeah, that's looking okay. There's the square, then we've got that painted over. What we're then going to do is we're going to go back to filter. Before we do that, we need to flatten this. Now, there's a few options for this. We can either shift, select those, and right click and go merge layers. Or if we want to keep those, we can create a new layer and do Alt, Control, Shift, and the letter E. Press all of those at the same time. And that will create a new layer with everything that's visible. Now that Alt, Control, Shift, E is a really important one for later on. So see if you can remember that shortcut. And that's going to create a new layer right there, which has got both of those layers combined. I'm going to go back to Filter, go Other, and go to Offset again. And let's take this back down to 0 and 0. Okay, that looks great. Let's go to Filter, Other, Offset, and let's go to 100 and 100 again. Not too bad, but I did notice something just back when we took it back to 0. Not too bad. You really want to just keep an eye out for any weird linear stuff that's going to happen. But let's just double check with that. I'm going to hit OK. So we've got our repeatable pattern. We are actually going to define this as a pattern. So very simply, we are going to go to Edit and then down to Define Pattern over here. And I'm going to call this Rust, like so, and I'm going to hit OK. And now what actually this does is this now has placed this as a pattern. So if I go to my paint bucket, for example, I can actually click in there and bring up, and I'm actually going to have that as a pattern that we can fill. And let's have a quick look at how we might be able to apply this. So I'm going to jump back to my image, and within this image I can place the pattern and actually have quite a bit of control over it. Now, to give you an idea of how we can start applying this, I'm actually going to go to my flatting layers, and I'm going to use the wand. So shortcut is W, and make sure it's on the magic wand, not the quick selection. I'm going to untick sample all layers. We have continuous ticked on, and anti-alias I'm also going to tick off. Tolerance usually is set about 32, but at the moment fairly low tolerance is fine because we do have these block colors from our flatting options. So I'm going to select the helmet, for example, this main red part here. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to fill this with a color. I'm going to switch that back to foreground, and let's just fill it with a color. It doesn't really matter what that color is at the moment because we are going to make that sort of disappear anyway. So there it is there. If we turn that off, so let's fill it with something that's going to be more visible. Let's do a bright green just to really freak it out. Deselect. So there it is there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply an effect to this. I'm going to go to FX, and I'm going to go to Pattern Overlay. Right down the bottom there. Let's move that across. And here we have some preset patterns that are in here. All sorts of really cool stuff. But right down the bottom we have Rust, which is the one that we've just created. And I'm going to scale that up. And we can also move it around accordingly, which is kind of cool. And this is a great way of filling out a big chunk of area that we might be applying a texture to. Now, the better your patterns, the more time you spend making sure they don't have this sort of lineated thing, the better. But in the meantime, this is pretty good. We can shift this around, and we can drop the opacity on that, or maybe we can, change it to a multiply or an overlay. Try different blend modes that might actually work with this. And let's not forget that with this, we can also add specific colors and change these as well. So we can end up with some pretty cool looking stuff that's really starting to get a nice pattern.